So, hi everyone. Indeed, empathy is the core of the project. So, in my presentation today, I will try to somehow disentangle this weird notion of empathy. We all use it, it is present in everyday life and discussions, but there is really no consensus on how to define empathy. As we say, there are so many definitions as the philosophers dealing with empathy. So one of our aims in this project is to first to try to understand what empathy really is and how, what does responding empathetically towards artworks and representational art or non-representational art may mean. So to do that, we first try to define this notion. One thought of the reason why we have so many difficulties in defining empathy comes from the fact that empathy cannot be considered as an affective state per se. So when I say that I empathically react towards someone, I am not in a specific mood. For example, I'm not sad or happy or whatever, but I somehow experience the other's emotional state. So empathy coins the experience of experiencing someone else's emotions. So it's a success term that describes our achievement to somehow experience feelings that are more congruent with another's situation rather than with our own. In the public speech and in the political realm, empathy is often confused with compassion. Compassion is the sentiment that can motivate citizens to care and take responsibility for their fellow citizens who suffer. In Aristotle, pity and compassion are understood as responses to another's misfortune or suffering. So, pity and compassion are emotional states. It's our recognition of one's own vulnerability, and therefore we respond to another's misfortune. So we get a feeling of suffering for the other state, while compassion is a process, an activity, something we do to experience and understand the other person. But contrary to what one may think, empathy is a relatively new term. It was introduced in the early 20th century. It is not an ancient Greek word, as you may think. It was introduced in the literature as a translation of a German term, the Gemeinfühlung, which literally means feeling into. So it was first introduced in psychology and aesthetics to explain the experience of aesthetic or inanimate objects. So we use the concept Einfühlung to describe the aesthetic perception of an object by means of projecting of the self into the object. So Theodor Lipps, who was the first to introduce the term, he expanded it to include the experience of other people's mental states as well. Up to that time, the term sympathy was used extensively to denote the act of perceiving, understanding, or imagining the other's perspective, with references to the work of the Scottish Enlightenment theorists such as David Hume and Adam Smith. In the move from exploring Einfühlung as an aesthetic perception of an object to exploring it as applying to interpersonal relations, Lipps missed to differentiate between Einfühlung and sympathy. So they translated Einfühlung as empathy, believing that they had coined a completely distinct concept. So today empathy has taken a more interpersonal or social nature, and various accounts have been proposed as to how we should understand empathetic responses. Some argue that we theorize and we make inferences to understand the other's mental state. So this theory approach says that in trying to understand how one is feeling, we deploy a rather tacit theory, a reasoning, such as if I see Alberto coming in the room with his face red and shaking his hands, I may assume, because I believe that people get red and move their hands when they are angry, I may deploy this theory, a folk psychology theory that I have, and all things being equal, I will conclude that Alberto is angry at something. So this is the theory of understanding other minds, a way we have to understand what other people think. Now, this theory has been under pressure since the 80s, and we have new theories, the simulation approach, that argue for a knowledge-poor mechanism that allow us to use our own self as a model for the other person's mental states. So, for example, we attain empathy by means of perspective shifting, which is by imagining being the other state, the other person, being in the other person's shoes, and therefore we use our own mental states to simulate another person's cognitive and affective state. So if I'm wondering why Alberto is red and shakes his hands, I imagine myself being in this situation. I imagine Effie being red and shakes her hands, and therefore I conclude that Alberto is angry because I imagine myself in his shoes. So simulation theories actually propose two accounts. One involves this conscious imaginative process, an imaginative reconstruction of another person's experience. And the other one involves a more subconscious form of direct responsiveness to mental states of the others. This is a primitive, low-level mind reading. So, okay, yeah. Okay, thank you. So, in the early 1990s in Parma, Italy, Giacomo Rizzolatti and his group first discovered a special class of neurons in the macaque brain in the ventral premotor area. This is what you see in the image. This came to be called mirror neurons. What makes this special class of neurons important is that they are activated both when an individual performs a particular type of action, for example, grasping an apple, and when an individual observes another performing that type of action. Thus, in some respects, we mirror others at a neurological level. So this is not on the conscious level. We have no conscious experience of what takes place, but subconsciously our brain mirrors another person's movements or acts. This is what this simulation theory is based on. And there are also new contributions to the discussion from the phenomenology camp, who argue for non-simulation accounts of empathy that suggest that empathy should not be conceived as a process, but that it should be seen as a mode of perception, as a face-to-face encounter or a response to the observed bodily and behavioral expressions of others, and involves a direct perceptual access to the other's emotional and affective states. So, for example, if I see Alberto, I do not have to simulate his situation or whatever. I simply see him and directly I perceive that he's angry, in the same way that I perceive someone's red shirt as being red. through perception, direct perception. Now, in everyday talk, we refer to empathic responses to artwork somehow fast and loose. So in seeing Goya's Thirst of May, we may say that we place ourselves in the depicted people's place. We understand their thoughts and their feelings. We have a feeling of utmost justice that wells upon us. But this is not actually accurate, because not every tear or heartbeat about the other is empathetic in nature. So to respond appropriately to another's emotional state is not equivalent as attaining the same type of emotions with the other person. Let's discuss an example. So we see the suffering Valentine that has turned her face towards us, breathing heavily, as her parted lips seem to reveal. The yellow scene, forming the background as well as tinting her face, conduces to the feeling of being ill and the sadness expressed. In seeing Hodler's painting, we may most likely respond emotionally. We may undergo feelings that we would be inclined to describe in terms such as sad for the terminally ill Valentine. In this case, we are sympathetic to the fictional character. We understand her suffering or how disease has affected her life, but we are not in any way feel what she feels, what the fictional character feels. Although our emotional response comprises the understanding of what she may be feeling or thinking, it does not involve or necessarily involve being in her shoes or being her or imagining being in a similar situation. We rather side with her. But even in the ordinary language, we use the concept of empathy in relation to paintings, photographs, drawings, prints, artworks, TV shows. Is there any evidence that empathy does occur in our engagement with pictures? We have evidence from neuropsychological research. Can I have the slides with neuro research? Thank you. Sometimes seeing a picture involves an immediate passive response to a depicted face. Studies accounting for emotion sharing using measures of facial electromyography indicate that when participants were exposed to pictures of happy or angry facial expressions, facial mimicry was observed. So this is an evidence that we literally mirror what we see depicted. Moreover, we have research from Friedberg and Gallese that we have a type of embodied simulation that occurs in cases such as Pollock's paintings or the cat canvases of Lucio Fontana, where the viewer simulates the implied gestures of the artist. So we may experience a sense of bodily involvement with the movements that are implied by the physical traces, in this case, the brush marks or drippings, of the creative actions of the producer of the work. So this is not at the conscious level, it's at the subconscious level, but the evidence shows that we simulate the movements that were made by the artist to create this work. So what would then mean to say that we respond empathetically to a picture, or to an artwork? An intriguing idea is that by seeing the artwork, I not only understand and come to know that the depicted figure feels thus and so, but I somehow have a kind of lively bodily experience of the depicted emotions, and I get a form of knowledge of that figure. So I will first discuss a basic type of empathic response towards picture. You may think of these pictures that you can find anywhere in the internet. It's pictures depicting the view from a cliff from the point of view of someone looking down, where the viewer of the picture, we in this case, We may get a feeling of fear of heights, or of losing balance, or of falling, as if one is unwilling to look below. In these cases, besides the third-personally observable reflexive changes of the viewer, we ourselves are bodily aware of certain feelings caused by seeing the painting. We are aware that what we experience is a response to another person's experience, to what we see depicted. So we know that our experience is anchored in another person's experience, and our response in this manner is automatic, is immediate. It is not under our control. We do not choose to feel the way we feel, but it is conscious. We consciously feel this type of nausea. So our response can be considered as empathetic. So it's a first low-level type of empathy that is at the conscious level. We empathize with the emotions that the scene would arise to a depicted character. Now, perceiving an artwork and perceiving the expressed emotion is a skill that evolves over practice and engagement with art. It's not something that we are simply born with, but it is developed and evolves over practice. So let me share a story. Then we have the painting from Severi's museum. Okay. This is a painting, lithograph actually, from a museum in Cyprus. It depicts a child sitting and selling fruits in the island. So when I first saw it, I didn't know anything about the story of this lithograph. And I saw it simply as expressing melancholy. And I turned my head and moved to the other paintings. An incisive artist, a very perceptive artist that was next to me, who had never seen the painting again, he took a face of disgust, of repugnance, and he was like something like that, and he said, "This is aversive." So I didn't know why he had this reaction. He told me, "I don't know, it's something about the hands," he said. Then we've asked the curator of the museum, and she explained to us that the person who did the lithogram was a very famous pedophile, and actually the child had been molested, sexually molested, and the artist, he described his dreadful actions in his memoirs. So what I'm trying to say is that the skill to empathetically respond to pictorial artworks is not a one-time acquisition. It's not immutable in time. So it's a skill or a virtue, and we can develop it. It can be developed. Some people, as for example the artists, are certainly better than others in perceiving empathetically what is being shown in an artwork, but we can add further skills. We can be trained and we can learn to develop this type of response. So in our project, we try to take this notion of empathy and understand whether we can use it to have a type of connection with inanimate things or with nature. So the idea is that we may empathize with depicted landscapes that do not include characters, in the sense that we empathically respond towards what the scene expresses. This is something we do. For example, Salman Rushdie says that Harun, one of his heroes, lives in a city that is so sad, a city so ruinously sad that it had forgotten its name. and it stood by a mournful sea full of glamfish. Or we may describe a pastoral landscape as expressing melancholy, the landscape tonight, please, as expressing melancholy or sadness, or we may experience scenes as expressing pain or trauma. So we somehow catch the emotional ambience of our environment. In these cases, we do not have a full-blown emotional response, but we do pick up or mirror, we mirror an indeterminate feeling or mood that is not necessarily directed towards a person depicted in the scene. So, I would like to use another example that I saw yesterday. I had the pleasure to see yesterday for the first time in person in the Prado Museum, the Agnus Dei. So why is this painting that depicts an animal moves us in such a profound manner? I would like to suggest that part of the explanation has to do with the vivid sense of restraint experienced by the animal, the uncomfortable position it is in, and the friction against the ropes. Remember this type of simulation reactions that we are able to feel. So through these subconscious and low-level responses that we have towards what is depicted, we somehow get the thought that the animal feels thusly, and I use thusly to pick out this feeling of restraint and friction that we simulate. So this is an example of how an artwork does not simply provide reasons to think certain issues relating to animal ethics and human-animal relations, but it turns them into something more experiential, something that we literally feel into. And one final explanation, as I'm sure that our colleagues will later explore more on this type of art. This is Tai Zihi's Plastic Ocean. For this installation, the artist collected, cleaned, and organized 500 kilos of discarded ocean plastic that were hung motionless in space. So the viewer or the visitor enters this underwater realm of the artwork, and that can directly infect her through the bodily sensory motor engagement with this suffocating environment. So we are this way able to adopt the perspective of life forms and experience what it is like living in an ocean that has been polluted. So the type of empathetic responses discussed here, basic empathy and perspective taking, explain why some pictures and artworks afford a sense of first personal relation or presence to another being's experience or towards landscape, nature, and non-human beings. So our aim is that, given that empathy is usually taken as a relation between human beings or anthropomorphized creature, we feel that works need to be done in both thoroughly understanding what empathy towards nature may mean and in developing connections between artists interested in empathy and sustainability relationship and philosophers, social scientists, and sustainability experts. Thank you.